Hi, and welcome to my June edition of the garden tour. Let's go ahead and head inside. First, I wanted to share the addition of some more squash. Last month this bed was empty aside from the little bit of artichokes in the back. I wanted this bed to be asparagus and artichoke. I wanted a perennial bed, but I wasn't able to get my hands on any asparagus in time. So I do have the two artichoke starts, but then I decided it's a full sun bed and I would go ahead and just add some squash over here this year. So I incorporated this teepee cattle panel. These were some extra pieces of a cattle panel that I had. It's not full size. And the idea here is so that when the squash get large enough, I can tie them to it, and then the squash aren't laying on the ground, and it helps incorporate more usage of the space. So this is actually a cucumber. I had got some extra cucumber starts and decided to just throw them in here, but I have spaghetti squash, and this squash was just a seed that I had. So I decided to just throw it in. I can't remember what kind it is. And then another spaghetti squash, and then another questionable variety. And then in the back is the asparagus starts. And I'm not sure that I'm going to get any asparagus from them this year. They were a little late, and they aren't looking as big as they should be, but at least they're here and ready for next year. And then in this other bed, here's another little bit of, this is an acorn squash that's been here for a while, and it actually wasn't doing very well last month, so I gave it a Epsom salt bath. And also that squash, both these squash over here have just a regular cattle panel lead against the fence, so I can also use that to help trellis. But I'm really pleased with how they're coming out. They're doing pretty well finally. It's taken a long time to get them to kind of take off. So also in this bed with a little bit of squash in the back is my tomatoes. Previously in the year I had got some tomato starts from someone local, and none of them really took at all. In fact, the zucchini, I'll get to that too, but most of the starts that I got locally from someone didn't take. And I wouldn't say that they were bad. I think perhaps they just didn't acclimate well to my soil. I did harden them off and everything, but for whatever reason they didn't do very well. So I ended up going and buying some more starts from Wilco, and I got some tomato varieties that were on sale, and so some of them I don't actually know what they are, so that'll just be a fun surprise. But I end up having a lot of tomato plants this year, and we'll kind of get into that a little bit more over there. But I wanted to share this particular tomato plant. It obviously looks pretty bad, and I'm thinking the reason for that is I had read that when you're pruning and you're pulling suckers off, you can, if it's actually like a nice good sized sucker, you can put it right back into the ground and get another plant from it. So this sucker I pulled off of this big one maybe the beginning of the week, and I planted it in the ground, and you know, honestly it's a little wilted and a little bit unhappy, but it's not as dead as I would expect. So I think it may bounce back if I get any fruit off of it. We will see, but that's what's going on there. And then this variety actually it's an Oregon Sunrise, which I've never tried before. It was just what was available at the farm store, and it's got some blooms on it. So that's what's going on there. And we've got one more variety back here that's also doing well. I try and come in here at least every couple days and prune and take some suckers off and help it kind of get up onto the trellis a little bit. I haven't tied any of them. I just keep kind of repositioning them onto the trellis. And part of the reason that I'm using the trellis instead of the tomato cage, in the past I found that the tomato cage, it gets so weighed down and then really hard to get in and actually prune and take care of it. And airflow is really important, I read, for tomato plants. So was hoping that by putting them on this type of trellising system, I can control a little bit more of the airflow with it. Now over here in this bed is actually supposed to be where my pole beans are, and I've only got one good one coming up the trellis. All the other ones haven't seemed to take so well. But this bed is primarily potatoes. I believe that there are russet variety and possibly some red. I got some from a friend and then also just used what I had in my pantry. But this bed has in the past been potatoes, and I found that potatoes just keep volunteering to come right back, and it does so well over here, so I go ahead and let it continue to be potatoes. But I did add, I don't know if we can see it over here, some of these little guys. They are fava beans that were just on sale at the feed store, so I decided to throw those in here, and they're doing pretty well. We've got some buds on them, and I'm really excited to see how they do. But yeah, there's just a little bit of my one pole bean going on. But don't fear, because I do have some bush bean varieties. I always do bush beans, and I normally put them in a different location, but I couldn't not do any bush beans this year, so I do have a couple going in here, and also some more tomatoes. Story with some of these surplus tomatoes. I had bought some more to replace the starts that didn't do well, planted those, and then in that following week, I think, a friend of mine had a whole bunch of extra starts, and I think it was like $5 for a bunch of them, and I said I'd come get them, and there was a lot more than I was anticipating, which was okay. But then I suddenly had all of these other varieties and little starts that really quickly needed to get replanted. So I threw some in here, and I put some in some buckets. We'll get to that. There are some more of the surplus ones. Some of them I was able to save the variety tags for. So I've got Better Boys. I don't even know what that one was. And just some other varieties that I wouldn't have actually normally selected. But because they were surplus and I have more room in the garden, I ended up getting some buckets from some friends. And like one of this is just a really beat up horse grain bucket, and then some other horse supplement buckets, and I just drained holes in the bottom of them. And this is actually the first time that I've been trying some of these 5-gallon bucket tricks, so we'll see how that goes for my situation. But in the meantime, it just gave me the ability to plant some more right here on the outside with a fence that I can help trellis the tomatoes with. And while we're outside talking about the buckets, 5-gallon bucket deal, here I have 3 different varieties of sweet potatoes going in buckets. And it's kind of a funny thing, because in the beginning of the growing season I had ordered a bunch of different slips and seeds and things, and a lot of those come when they're available. So I had actually forgot that I had bought these sweet potato slips, and then I hadn't left room for them in the garden. So when they arrived, they were a live plant, so I had to really quickly figure out a way to get them in the ground. So again, I enlisted the help of my friends who had these buckets available for me, so I just drilled holes in the bottom of them, filled them half with compost and half with natural dirt that I have, and then put the slips in, and they're actually taking a lot better than I was anticipating. They're really doing quite well. So I'm excited to see how the sweet potatoes do in the 5-gallon buckets. I also have a couple more sweet potatoes that I put in my big half-barrel whiskey barrels. And I personally think that these are probably going to do better because they're going to have more space to get bigger, and the 5-gallon buckets really limit how much space, how big the potatoes can actually get. But hopefully they both do fine, and it'll be kind of a nice experiment to see which way works better, and then in contrast to the potatoes in the ground in the raised garden bed. So now, back in the garden, the last bed of the 4, I purchased some more cucumbers because the cucumbers that I had started myself and planted, none of them took well once they came out. And that also was the case with the zucchini. Like I mentioned earlier, most of the starts that I got were all from someone local, and none of them took. And it's funny because zucchini are just so dang easy to grow, and they're always in this location of the garden. So I know that the sunlight and the natural needs of it in this area work really well for the zucchini plants, but they just did not do well. So I bought some more from Wilco when I went and got some more tomatoes, and I ended up getting a regular variety and then also some yellow zucchini. So I'm excited to see the two different varieties with that. And again, in this one, I just used another TP type attachment with the cattle panels, and hopefully they'll just head up that way really well. Thing that I put in here just to use up the space in the inner part of the bed under the trellis. I was getting some garlic that was surplus in the kitchen, so I ended up just throwing them in here on a whim. And I've done garlic before, and it really wasn't successful. It was an overwintered garlic, but so I didn't really have any expectations for this, but it's actually doing so well. I ended up planting more throughout. And we'll see how the season goes, how they end up looking. Now, the other thing that I wanted to share that I put back here was some snap peas, and again, the peas ended up being kind of a afterthought because I didn't have the peas initially at the beginning of the season, so I ended up planting them a little bit late, but they're taking really well. And actually the season for us here in Western Washington has been really interesting because we've had a lot of significant rain and then heat, and it's made for some really humid days. That's a little not normal for us, but it's been really great for the garden, so can't really complain too much there. And one more thing to share, yet another tomato plant. I think this is my one Roma. I really like growing Romas because I do a lot of canning with my tomatoes and making sauces and dicing them up and things like that. And so Romas are usually my choice. However, I wasn't able to find any when I was getting started this year, but I did get one. This was one that was a start from my friend. So I'm really happy that I ended up having one. And so that one's in its own pot over here, and I'm kind of hoping to baby this one the most because, like I said, Romas are my favorite to use. And again, I just put it someplace close by to a fence so I could use the fence to help trellis it up.